Good afternoon, morning, evening, or night, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alex, and this episode's subject comes in from Zombie Slayer 226. What is your opinion on the amount of violence in video games? Do you think it should be decreasing, or there isn't enough violence in the games being produced today? I think the answer is actually surprisingly simple. Well, there's really an answer, it's an opinion. I think video games are built around the idea of violence because video games are uniquely built around conflict. There has to be some kind of conflict for there to be a game. You need to have a goal, something that the game is based around to be able to complete it, and usually the default thing, the easiest thing to relate to and get involved with is violence. I don't think it should necessarily be decreasing. There's certainly enough violence in games as it is. It's not something I find offensive or lacking or anything like that. But what I do think is that as games diversify, as more games introduce better storytelling and all this, we're not going to see any decrease necessarily in violence, but as there are more games that come out, we're going to see more things like Journey or Adrift and all these things that aren't really based around anything like that, and the conflict is from other things in the world. I just got a phone call from the fucking phone company about some shit. But yeah, violence in video games. Yeah, I was saying about Drift and Journey and whatnot. They don't need to be around violence because there are other things that make the game playable. What do they call them? Not necessarily those two games I just mentioned, but like walking simulators and stuff. I think you got to compare it to something like the movie industry, which is the closest thing to the games industry in a lot of ways. In terms of like, you have your horror movies, you have your action movies, you have your violent, 18 plus gore fest movies, and then you have your romantic comedies and your animated films and stuff. It's the same sort of thing. I don't really care for violence for the sake of violence a lot of the time. I mean, it's fine, it doesn't offend me or anything. Like, I like Gears of War and stuff, like when you chainsaw people with a chainsaw gun. It's just ludicrous and funny and silly. But then on the complete opposite, like the violence in The Last of Us, it's totally warranted and actually adds to the story, and it makes everything feel more gritty and real. I think it's just something you have to consider, something you have to think about when you're designing a game. Because I'm trying to think of any of the games I've been playing recently, which ones of them haven't involved some kind of violence. Last game I played, GTA, I just finished again, completely utterly just completely obsessed with violence. Like, there's a part where you torture someone and everything, but there's all a point to it. And then there's like Ori and the Blind Forest. It's not really as violent as, say, something like GTA, but you still have an ability to attack other things, so technically there is some violence in there. I mean, every game ever where you have a gun, you're shooting stuff. So I think the majority of the market is, of course, are violent games. All the popular games are the violent games, because it's just the model. It's how shooters work, it's how brawlers works, how fighting games works. It's just how everything works, unless it's Mario. Actually, Mario's pretty violent. He crushes a lot of people and burns a lot of people and freezes a lot of people, and he's kind of a mass murderer. Speaking of mass murderers, sometimes the violence thing can actually contradict your story in a lot of ways. Like, an example I'm thinking of right now is BioShock Infinite. Like, the story's really personal and like downbeat when you're interacting with Elizabeth and stuff, but then you get your crazy, weird, what do they call it, the thing you have in your arm and you're flinging around on the skylines. You're crushing people's heads with it, and it's just like totally contrast to the personal story that you're just having, and it's kind of off-putting. Another example is like Uncharted, where it's just sort of comical because he just kills hundreds of people and no one ever references it, and it's just sort of like, yeah, he's a mass murderer. So all in all, I don't think it should be decreased. It's fine as it is, as long as more games are coming along that are doing something new with it, or being creative with it, or at least thinking about it. And there is enough violence as it is. I don't think it's something they need to actively try to increase. What do you think? Do you think there's somehow a lack of it, or too much of it? Tell me in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching. All comments and ratings are very much appreciated. And make sure you leave suggestions for future Job Labs. I'll see you next time. Bye! What was it? Jacksepticeye. His channel's only like 1 or 2 years old, and he's got, 3 million? That's insane. You see all these success stories all the time of people like that, and obviously they just put a lot of hard work in, they're consistent, they're the type of content that people are drawn to, and it just works out for them. But I think you have to have you can't go into it the idea of, I just want to be popular. You can't go in just wanting attention, because it's clear, it's obvious in your content half the time. When you're starting your channel saying things like,